Revelations. Welcome to video 8 of my Antidote to Tyranny. This will also be the equivalent to chapter 17 within Graham K. Griffiths' book Behold Jerusalem, and as such will feature in my Albion Landscape video series, which is the serialisation of Graham's book. This is Graham's own work and the serialisation of the items that he was forced to leave out of his original book, Behold Jerusalem. And so this was written 14 years after that date, back in 2018. These revelations refer to graphical sexual innuendo and practices, so I've had to really lock this down and put it as adults only. Some of the subjects covered within this series of 5 are alluded to within the main book in chapters 1 through to 16, but go into a little bit more detail within this book, within this serialization of his revelations. After going through these revelations several times in the production of this video, I will at the end be releasing a 6th video within this set to actually put my views over what has been revealed and what can be said about the Albion Zodiac and what I believe its true nature is. I will now pass you over to the words of Graham K. Griffiths.
Article 2 Part 2. Putting an ear to the mouth of Christ, continuing the missing revelations as deleted from the book Behold Jerusalem. The discovery of the zodiacal miracle buried within the foundations of England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. By Graham K. Griffiths. So where are we at? Well, we've just returned from a fingertip walk, courtesy of Ordnance Survey, along an otherwise unassuming country road, albeit beneath the loincloth of Cumbria's crucified Christ, and which via its uncanny shape led us back 5,000 plus years to that ancient Egyptian opening of the mouth ceremony, this specifically intended for the raising or resurrecting of their dead. In short, this road actually copies the very shape of the adze-like tool their high priests used in the performing of this rite, an instrument which was itself a copy of constellation of Ursa Major. On top of this, we also found that the 7, again otherwise unassuming place names, there's 7 stars which form the constellation of Ursa Major, strung along this same country road, not only mirror the placements of Ursa Major's stars, but when these names were delved into, seem themselves to uncannily reiterate the ancient Egyptian beliefs regarding the passage of the soul, from the mouth of the deceased back to its real home amongst the stars. However, when we then found that the place name on the very tip of the mouthpiece of this Cumbrian mimic of that adze was Gilbank, and that some 20 miles to the north the place that marks the actual mouth of this 48-mile-tall Christ was another Gilbank, then what else could we think but that both names were to be married up via the placing of this tool, which for some strange reason was hidden beneath his loincloth, in the mouth of this Christ whom is nailed here at the height of England. For to resurrect him. Moreover, are we also being told, through these in-your-face signs, that this same rite was likewise performed on Jesus himself soon after he was taken down from the cross and left for dead in that tomb? But of course, we need more evidence so as to bolster this shocking possibility, although to get it we'll need to go where even angels might fear to tread. Before we go there, let's not forget that word Gil has written upon the lips of this Christ as Gil Bank, when translated from both the Sumerian and Hebrew meant an exclamation of joy, and with this we're surely being told that whatever happened both during and post his crucifixion was essentially a blissful experience for him, and ignited by that which this landscape insists Christ had hidden beneath his loincloth, and kept warm right next to his genitalia. Blimey! Asterisk note, in a wonderfully graphic portrayal of what might be the above exclamation of joy, see the final chapter of my book where is shown the landscaped masterstroke which actually animates this Cumbrian Christ to the point of his very visual dancing off the cross. Let's now tread very softly whilst listening intently for the reasons why a crucified and dying man could yet seemingly cry out with joy, indeed, a nigh-on orgasmic exclamation of it. The opening of the mouth ceremony. Unfortunately, although considered to have been the most important and sacred of all the ancient Egyptian rituals, little information has filtered down to us regarding the actual mechanics of it, and the little which has, and this written down possibly thousands of years later than its original conception and practice, for prior to this the actual secret proceedings behind such ceremonies were only ever passed on orally from high priest to high priest, comes across, at least to my reading, as a likely bastardization of the original. In fact, I'd go so far as to suggest that what info has filtered down to us seems to be an almost pantomime mimic of that which was perhaps once the most mind-blowing spiritual act humanity has ever been party to, a ritual whose end result was the raising of the dead. Yes, we're talking on-the-spot resurrection, and that to me is no laughing matter at all. Indeed, some out-of-the-box thinkers of today, including myself, believe that Giza's Great Pyramid was in no way intended as some elaborate OTT tomb, surely a joke in itself. But on the contrary, a building designed specifically for this ultimate of ceremonies to be performed in short, a veritable resurrection machine. Asterisk note, in my final article this theory the Great Pyramid will itself gather some astonishingly visual support, and all this on British soil where else. Sadly again, however, I fear that even by the time of Tutankhamun, and in whose tomb this same ritual is depicted so splendidly on the wall directly behind his sarcophagus, see Article 2, Part 1, the ceremony had been for the most part misunderstood, or just plainly forgotten to a point where it was performed more out of habit than anything else. Again, I say this because what hieroglyphic records we have suggest that this opening of the mouth had become a lamentable mockery of the original intention, comically carried out on the already disemboweled, embalmed, and bandaged-up mummies of the deceased, and thus with no mouth to be seen, and thus no lower locked, remember mouth lock, jaw for that sacred and purposefully hooked tool to be hooked over and yanked down so as to open it in order that the spirit or soul, the Ka could either leave the deceased and fly away back home to the stars, or else re-enter the same as a reanimating breath of life. So music hall buffoonery or what? The pitiful truth then, was that this sacred adze was being used purely as a symbolic gesture, it being merely touched against the bandages where the mouth was now both stitched forever shut and hidden from sight, and whatever once magical words were still chanted at the scene, one just knows that the original point had been completely lost. Indeed, the object of the ceremony had become in no way an attempt to resurrect, but rather a gesture, made more in hope than anything else, of the re-enjoining of the deceased's Ka and Ba so as it could wing its way to the afterlife located amongst the stars of Ursa Major. Admittedly, not a totally unworthy aim in itself, but in my opinion, one that was a million light years away from the original intention of that vitally important act of actually opening the locked mouth of the deceased, and thus sparking, for us anyway, the incomprehensible physical or spiritual alchemy needed for that on-the-spot resurrection. This a rite perhaps first performed some 1,000, 3,000, or even 10,000 years prior to those latter-day pig's ear attempts towards the same. Hold your horses, Mr. Griffiths. Where the hell is your proof that the performing of the opening of the mouth ceremony ever resurrected a truly deceased, flatlined, stiff as a board, kaput pharaoh? Surely the intention was always to merely speed the soul onwards to the afterlife, and this basically no more than any vicar would do while a coffin is lowered into its grave. In answer, and without looking for such, I found a perfect copy of that opening of the mouth adze underneath the loincloth of cumbrous Christ, and where his genitals should have been. And besides all the other place names, from Solby to Mouthlock, and which as we've seen all sensationally pointing towards some Egyptian conceived root, or passage of the soul, that place on the very mouthpiece, a hook of it just so happens to match the same place name as marks this Christ's own mouth. And never stop reminding yourself that that name Gil in Sumerian Hebrew spells joy, thus Gil Banks, joy, is upon the lips of him who is the epitome of one who was dead but whom was resurrected in the flesh, and in all but 3 days. Likewise, is this same Gilbank joy written upon the mouthpiece tip of that star hook, double confirmation that something of immense importance regarding the behind-the-scenes truth of Christ's resurrection, this albeit as inconceivable as it is shocking, is nevertheless desperately trying to come to light. And because this is spelt out upon this landscape so colossally, we must indeed be brave enough to at least try to conceive, for as mind-bending as it is for us to get our heads around some sacred, magical procedure which may have aided the raising of Christ himself, it may turn out to prove no more far out than the idea of heart and limb transplants would have sounded to even my own grandparents. Before we move on to examine another aspect of this same magical ceremony, you may be already thinking that if this opening of the mouth thing was, as I've suggested, already stripped of its true potentiality by the time of Tutankhamun, and this some 1,300 years BC, then how come I'm proposing that it was the full and unadulterated original version that was performed upon Jesus, and which ignited his own resurrection? Well, as with all ancient wisdom which was over vast periods of time either weakened by misinterpretation, or else via ill-intended censorship, a pristine pearl of the original secret often found safe keeping in the hands of those who knew its true value, and I suggest that Jesus, along with his uncle Joseph of Arimathea, and Nicodemus, these the only 3 in that tomb after the crucifixion, knew. And let's not forget that soon after his birth Jesus was taken, and strangely so, to Egypt, surely an anathema to any Jewish family, and reportedly to Heliopolis, the very epicenter and hotbed of Egyptian religion. Interesting too, in a no smoke without fire kind of way, Jesus was sometimes, and this because of his miracle working, sneered at as the Egyptian magician. Add to this the fact that the years preceding his ministry went by mostly unrecorded, and yet scattered with rumors that he traveled far from his homeland, even to Britain, in search of ancient knowledge. Then who knows what Jesus knew by the time he returned from out of the so-called wilderness, itself a shorthand term for the secret places of high learning? So let us too venture deeper into this same wilderness of forgotten, or purposefully buried truths. Sperm from heaven. I think most of us get a thrill when we're lucky enough to suddenly catch sight of a shooting star streak across the night sky, enough for some of us to even make a wish upon. For those ancient Egyptians such a sighting was no less of a thrill, indeed, to them it must have been imbued with even more magic, for that silver bolt shooting towards earth was perceived as the very sperm of their creator god Atom, ejaculated so as to fertilize the mother earth, and as such to find a fallen metal meteorite was to hold something prized above gold, the sacred seed of God, no less. Added to this the fact that iron and nickel was not a material naturally found in Egypt. It meant that when a chunk of meteorite was found, it was understandably reserved only for the most sacred of uses. One such use being the exciting theory that the capstone to some of their phallic obelisks were of meteorite iron, and thus the stone phallus was tipped with a symbolic globule of star sperm, but more of this in my final article. But perhaps for us who seek the reason why an opening of the mouth adze has been hidden, and shockingly so, beneath Christ's loincloth, know this: another use for that meteoric iron sperm of Atom was for it to be wrought into the shape of that constellation of Ursa Major, and thus to become the magical handheld instrument, adze, as used by the high priests in that same death-defying opening of the mouth ceremony. Asterisk note. Just to mention here that the current thinking as to how the so-called building bricks of life first arrived on Earth is now focusing upon them having been deposited here via fallen meteorites and comet debris. Seed indeed. However, and before we take another breath, think on this too: read the above news. Surely the unavoidable and taboo-infused image, which follows fast upon the heels of this act of inserting a meteorite iron adze into the mouth of the deceased, is that the high priest was also in effect, and knowingly so, placing the life-giving seed as sperm of Atom into that same open mouth. And as you toy with that, you must also ask as to whether that instrument of iron star seed was itself but a cover-up to the fact that real semen was also put into the open mouth of the corpse, in itself an emphatic gesture of giving real life back to the dead. Okay, a shocking thought perhaps, and yet we shall find later that the swallowing of sperm as part of the religious ceremonies of several belief systems, including an early form of Christianity, was not uncommon, and was seen as a sacred act of taking their living God within themselves, a Eucharist, perhaps more profound than mere bread and wine. But again, more of this highly taboo stuff later. Asterisk note. What with all these sperm swallowing innuendos seemingly stacking up, I am reminded again of how the landscape of Wales has seen fit to depict the colossal form of Virgo as our own British goddess, Earth Mother, Ceridwen, and whom so graphically reaches for the equally sperm seed-shaped Bardsey Island for to swallow it. See Article 1 along with my book. And although neither the ancient Egyptians or Celts would have had a clue as to what a single sperm looked like, I can't help feeling that the landscape, in particular that of Dartmoor, North Wales, and now Cumbria, is trying to tell us of today something of monumental importance regarding this same swallowing of sperm as seed, in order to instigate some sort of rebirth. From here on in, be warned that this same taboo drumbeat is only going to get louder still. Oh, and doesn't Ursa Major itself look like some cubist depiction of a sperm once its stars dots are joined up? Asterisk note. By joining up the star dots of Ursa Major, see how it too suggests the shape of a sperm. Anyway, and to further add to this growing rhythm to the beat of meteorite plus Ursa Major equals sperm equals a seed equals a strange hint of some mystic formula towards a catalyst for resurrection, I think we should now take a look at what images our ancestors envisioned when gazing up at those stars of Ursa Major. To some its shape suggested a plough, and do not ploughs prepare the ground for the sowing of seed? While to others it was of course the Great Bear, and although a bear would seem to be bereft of any seed as sperm innuendos, it was once, nevertheless, termed the honey-eater, a honey licker. Could there be a touch of innuendo lurking there after all? No, perhaps not. No matter, and keeping this seed thing going, to the Chinese this same star group is known as the bushel. While two further names for this same star group, although having nothing to do with seed, certainly have a lot to do with fellows famous for returning from the dead, these the litter of Lazarus, and wow, did Jesus even use this same adze to resurrect Lazarus, and King Arthur's chariot, the mortally wounded Arthur being ever prophesied to one day return alive and kicking butt. Oh, and neither can we forget this constellation's title of the Big Dipper, a ladle or spoon, a mere item of kitchenware and lacking all suggestion of either seed or resurrection, and yet when half filled with a sample from the cooking pot may well be touched to the lips and sexily sip therefrom. Well, that's how Nigella tastes her broth. Sorry, I'm chuckling again. All intriguing snippets of star lore, and all giving a nod and a wink perhaps to the strange line of inquiry we're following. But how did that same starry configuration suggest itself to the eye of those ancient Egyptian stargazers themselves? Well, and as earlier mentioned, the rather deflating answer is that they saw it as the thigh of the ox, or bull, and except perhaps for a minor hint towards the fertility of that beast, this at first glance not a title especially sympathetic to my suspicions. In fact, this whole daft image becomes even more ludicrous when we learn that in those days when I feel that the original secrets of the opening of the mouth ceremony had been all but lost, it seems that the priest still practicing it would sometimes touch an actual thigh of an ox to the lips of the deceased. Again, what a pantomime! But then again, recollect now that place name of Oxenthwaite planted upon that Ursa Major shaped country lane which crosses the genital and thigh areas of our Cumbrian Christ. A touch interesting in the context of things maybe, but not half so damned interesting as learning now that the thigh was a code word image for a penis, and no, that's not another piece of wishful thinking on my part, but it's exactly how the Bible prescribes the same. Hear George Riley Scott in his book Phallic Worship say it for me: the persistent practice of the biblical translators of disguising sexual references and phallic indications by the employment of euphemisms or harmless terms is again illustrated in the deliberate use of the word thigh for penis. In short then, slip your hand beneath this Cumbrian depiction of Ursa Major, a thigh of the ox, and you'll find that you've just touched the penis of Christ. Shock and horror? No, just the ongoing innocence of this fully conscious landscape in its efforts to speak to us. Indeed, this depiction of Ursa Major beneath his loincloth is his penis. And just listen to that drumbeat of dangerous taboo getting louder and nearer still. Seems then that maybe there was more to the Egyptians' hilarious touching of the lips of the deceased with a great hunk of meat than that which initially meets the eye? What I do know, however, is that these beliefs of ancient Egypt, whether of clumsy thighs or sublime showers of meteoric sperm, are certainly nagging away at our thoughts as we lift that pastured loincloth, and find an English country lane in the shape their Ursa Major inspired opening of the mouth adds, and this provocatively running across where the phallus of Christ should be, or then again, are we shown that this ad's ox thigh is, symbolically speaking, indeed his penis? And what with this sacred instrument being once used to slot into the mouth? Well, I think you may also like to hear the following tidbit from Saint Isidore of Seville, 560 to 636 AD, a scholar with a fondness for etymology. Anyway, and without, I'd guess, trying to validate any grotesquely heathen opening of the mouth ceremony, he tells us quite innocently that the root source of Ursa a bear is own mouth, so even the great bear himself comes now bearing his own gift to this table of dazzling imagery, and which surely adds up to the fact that we're bang on the right track, and bang bang goes that taboo drum again. Amazing then the multicultural imagery allotted to this one constellation. And yet whether it be the allusion to seeds as in the plough or the bushel, the raising or returning of the dead as in the litter of Lazarus, Arthur's chariot, or to that penis-coated ox's thigh, and which was itself used in an after-death ritual, it's apparent that this layering of seeds a penis next to two characters whom are famed for returning from the dead, not to mention that the shape of this star grouping was the inspiration to the shaping of that meteorite sperm-wrought opening of the mouth adds, and yep, a replica of one found beneath Christ's loincloth. Well, let's just say that all these images seem provocatively suggestive of the ingredients needed for a cocktail so potent that it could restore life back to the dead, a medicine come elixir to be taken orally, or as the great bear roars at us, via one's own mouth, and of course swallowed. And yeah, I think by now you must all have an inkling as to the direction this line of inquiry is now heading, and it really is signposted ultra taboo. The Gnostics, now they seemingly did swallow sperm, and how? Without doubt, something highly taboo, to us, anyway, and stemming from out of the deep past, is being ramped up as we peel back further the cloth from off his loins. More startling still, however, will be to hear these same provocative whispers both confirmed, and seemingly supported, from out of the very mouth of this Cumbrian Christ. Thus, and because this landscape is seemingly demanding that we do so, we must now scrutinize the perceived heresies of some of those earliest followers of Christ, the Gnostics. Reams upon fascinating reams have of course been written about them, but we're here only on the trail of one thing, this their supposed ingesting of sperm as part of their religious practices. However, before we pursue such we must remind ourselves that for many an ancient culture there was absolutely no distinction between sex and religion. Indeed, the term sacred sexuality would sum it up perfectly for them. Whereas, in Orthodox Christianity it's no secret that sex was the great unspoken taboo, and although they may have since lightened up a tad in this respect, it's still not your regular pulpit topic prior to Sunday communion. Yet to those earlier Gnostics it certainly seems to have been unashamedly otherwise. Because Gnostic Christianity predated Catholicism by many centuries, one is tempted to come to the logical assumption that their beliefs, practices were orally passed on to them from a time far closer to the original source than the written, and much edited and censored version, the Orthodox Church felt comfortable enough with to make known to her own flock. Moreover, one has to wonder whether the heretical practices which the Gnostics were to be later accused of by the Church, were but the secret doctrines that some believed Jesus to have taught only to his closest disciples, although I am of the opinion that some of these secrets may have only been shared with Joseph of Arimathea, and Nicodemus, more in my Article 3, and which the Church, for some reason, was perhaps hell-bent on keeping under wraps. If so, I must again ask if such a cover-up is especially highlighted in that pertinent placement of that stumbling block scandal we found at Solby, by the soul, namely the worrying scandal Beck. Certainly for me, to see a scandal stationed by a soul stinks to high heaven that something is amiss. Indeed, I see a sternly pointing finger towards the possibility that for thousands of years as the masses have either been purposefully duped, like, there's no such thing as a soul, but such a concept was ever a good yarn by which the religious hierarchies could hold their flocks to ransom for fear of having their souls condemned to hell. Or else could it be that we do indeed have souls, but have been maliciously robbed of something of profound importance relating to the true nature of them, a truth, which was perhaps at the very heart of Jesus' secret teaching, but which has been kept away from us by the established church on account that it would have spiritually uplifted mankind from the lowly station those same religious hierarchies preferred him to occupy, a truth, however, which the Gnostics both knew something of and likewise practiced, hence their persecution by the church under the trumped-up charge of heresy. As for myself, I firmly believe it is of this latter scenario, otherwise why this incredible miracle underfoot? Wherefore that potent word, scandal, has been so pertinently voiced in the same breath as Solby, although a scandal now being brought to light upon the body of cumbrous joyful Christ, joyful, because he is now no longer being gagged, hence the stumbling block is to be removed, the scandal outed, and the real and glorious truth of our souls, of our immortal place within this conscious universe, is now to be verified from out of his own Cumbrian mouth. Asterisk note, neither do I use the word gag lightly. In my Article 3, and when I take you with me to stand beside Christ's gill-bank mouth, you will for a fact witness an iron gag, a veritable mouthlock. We know then that the Church denounced the Gnostic practices as heretical and strove to run them out of town, but as so often happens they only ran them underground, so as to resurface in another time, and perhaps such is happening here in our struggle to interpret that scent of taboo wafting up from the loins of cumbrous Christ. I say this, because it was said that one of their heresies was to sip semen rather than wine from their Eucharist cup, and from whose mouth exactly did they get that wild idea? The Church said, the devil, the Gnostics said, the Christ. So do the Gospels, as we know them today, record all of Jesus' teachings. The 4th century Church Father Saint Epiphane, whilst damning the Gnostics to hell for their filthy and heretical practices, and ranting that many of the rituals involved the anointing and swallowing of this sacred substance, semen, an orgiastic ritual that had been the bane of the Old Testament prophets of 1,000 years before. Yet in the same breath he nevertheless confirms our suspicions that not all Jesus taught is recorded in the Gospels by cryptically stating, because some secrets were not for the masses, in other words, his saying that these secrets were only ever passed on orally, and to the few. But don't take my word for it, take instead another sign of the early church, for Clement makes it even plainer, the secrets, like God himself, are entrusted not to writing but to the expressed word. To my mind both Epiphanius and Clement, as like many other church leaders of that time, may have been just mightily pissed off with the Gnostics, because they were indeed openly practicing those very secrets taught by Jesus to his inner circle, and this simply because they got to them first. If so, one cannot then dodge the question as to what exactly did Jesus ask his disciples to consume in his name at the end of the Last Supper. Epiphanius again, this time his first-hand observation of a Gnostic Eucharist. Men and women reciprocally ate the reproductive seed of humans, turning to the altar, and saying, to the Almighty, we offer in sacrifice this the body of Christ. No two ways about it then, they were saying that semen was itself the living Christ. Ultra taboo or what, or then again, just another example of sacred sexuality in all its innocent beauty. If, however, you think the above heresy shocking enough, well, get a load of this too. Epiphanius really does now stick the heretical boot in so as to build his damning case against them, this time by quoting from their Greater Questions of Mary, or Gospel of Mary. Jesus took Mary Magdalene to the mountain, prayed, and took from his side a woman, he began to mingle with her, have sex, and so, forsooth, consumed his own emission, semen. He indicated that we must act thus, so that we might live. And when Mary was disturbed and fell to the ground, he raised her up and said to her, O person of little faith, why did you doubt? This not the Jesus we are familiar with in the New Testament, but then again, maybe a side of Jesus that was simply misunderstood and thus censored out, or more worryingly still, was it perfectly understood but still removed from the eyes of us the masses, because within it was a kernel of that which held the rudiments of how to rise from the dead, so that we might live. On the other hand, it has been questioned as to whether all the above heretical evidence was spuriously produced in order to stitch up, and thus remove those wicked Gnostics from competing with the Church, and if so, maybe they never ever ingested semen as part of their version of the Eucharist. Either way, the object of our research here is not to make a case for or against such, but merely to lay the above examples alongside the strange evidence we have been challenged with upon the body of this great green Cumbrian Christ, and I don't know about you, but I get a whiff of smoke. Let's then carry on looking for the fire. Certainly, sex or fertility was in many ancient cultures the ultimate expression of their living god or goddess, and in the following tantric tidbit I do so hear the crackling of flames. Seems then that in these sexy tantric rites of India that a man whom, after masturbation, offers up his semen to the divinity, was referred to as a fish. Okay, a bit abstract, but again, was not the fish the very first sign of Christ? But for me it got far more fishy than this when I reminded myself that the place which marks this Cumbrian Christ's lips is Gill Bank. Think about it. So too does that same crackling sound issue forth from out of ancient Greece, and where the sacramental swallowing of semen was likewise practiced, for the human sperm was believed to carry the very essence of the soul. And as for our friends the ancient Egyptians, well, even their own creator god Atum created via masturbating, ejaculating into his own mouth, and thence literally spitting out other life forms. Asterisk note. Do factor in too all that fish swallowed within fish imagery we dissected in my article 1. Sure, I could easily go on listing many other examples, and believe me, there's loads of them. Of the sexually infused rituals that mankind has offered up to its many deities, and which to continue overlaying upon this Cumbrian evidence underfoot would I'm sure unearth other correlative gems. Although, and before we move on, if you really want to see sparks flying from beneath this of all loincloths, check out the following, and which in the context of all the above should really set your thoughts ablaze, as they certainly did mine. John Marco Allegro, the distinguished British scholar, and who was one of the translators of the Dead Sea Scrolls, found that the name Jesus, Joshua in its Greek form, meant the semen that heals or fructifies, the God's juice that gives life. And isn't resurrection itself the most profound example of healing ever? Jesus is indeed remembered as the master healer, but with this strange clue singing out of his very name are we being told that he used sacred semen, even his own, so as to perform those recorded miracles of healing, not least upon Lazarus, and this same fluid then finally used upon himself as part and parcel of that opening of the mouth ceremony, and which I propose was performed upon him in the tomb so as to bring about his resurrection. Allegro then goes on to inform us that the word Mars, and this very similar to the Catholic Latin name of the Eucharist meal, Mass, translates as male seed, and with that how can we not help but to question as to what exactly did Jesus instruct his disciples to consume in his name at that Eucharist of the Last Supper? An explosive question, but hearing Epiphanius tell of that which the Gnostics ingested at their own Mass, and which they glorified as the body of Christ, namely semen, well, it does make you wonder. Certainly, the Last Supper, partaken of in that upper room, itself indicative of the importance of what was to be instructed therein, was the last master class given by Jesus to his closest followers, and hence could have been of the highest secret of all, indeed, even the secret of how exactly he would himself defeat death, even how his uncle, Joseph of Arimathea, would heal, resurrect him on the third day via some version of that opening of the mouth ceremony, and this even via the use of Jesus' own miraculous semen? Little wonder that both the resurrections of Lazarus and Christ were carried out in complete privacy. I'm aware, of course, that for some the only flames to be seen in all the above are those licking up from the bowels of hell. For others, however, I hope that these same flashing tongues will be seen to have their source from beneath the metamorphic wings of the mythical phoenix, and which like Christ, resurrected itself. Certainly, in my article 4 will this same imagery explode off the map. Neither am I unaware that this seemingly once heretical path that we find ourselves treading brings with each step questions piled on top of questions. Questions so damn dizzying that I fear that we might never get to the bottom of them all, although not to at least try to answer them would, in my opinion, be a travesty, for it isn't I who am asking them, but the scintillating body of landscaped evidence which comprises this colossal Cumbrian Christ, and which now we've seen it, demands us to decode. That said, I feel that if we can drop off the cumbersome burden of our adult reason, if only for a moment or two, and to approach these same daunting questions in the happy-go-lucky way we as children once tackled the things that initially perplexed us, but which we nevertheless just love to fearlessly investigate anyway, then perhaps the answers we seek will present themselves in a reciprocal playful way. Once again know that such has certainly been the case for me throughout this my journey over earthly constellations, namely, whenever I've tried desperately to bring an adult intellect into play I've found myself lost, and sometimes even afraid, and yet when I've just allowed myself to have fun everything has fallen into magical place. Why, the very first glimpse I ever had of giants in Britain's coastal contours first appeared not to me as a man, but to the 11-year-old boy I once was. Believe me, love joined to a sense of play is the simple key which turns this landscaped great zodiac machine on. Come with me then as an exploring child, truly I tell you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it, Mark 10 verse 15, to the mouth of him who is not gagged anymore, but who is I believe singing his heart out. How do I know this? Well, you already know that the name which marks his mouth is Gil Bank, the Sumerian Hebrew word Gil meaning an exultation of joy, a joy not only prompted by his absolute victory over death, but so too perhaps just how it was achieved. What's more, this same joyful knowledge to the effect that, like Jesus Christ, no one else either will be hitherto condemned to rot in a grave, or get burned to ashes in an incinerator. Indeed, this same monumental news might be the main reason why this whole wonder in Britain's foundations has come to light. Staggering, I know, ludicrous beyond words, but check out that which only a force of love could have done to these astonishing fields of ours. If it has already brought the stars down to your feet, then do not mistrust these scintillating signs that the end of death is nigh, and that only eternal joy awaits us all and all whilst still in the living and breathing flesh. Just read the lips of this 48-mile-tall land Christ. That said, some readers may be thinking that I have above only reiterated that which is promised by present-day Christian teaching, this to the effect that if we follow the scriptures we too will find eternal life after death, but no, I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying, and this once more based purely upon the strength of what this landscape is show seems to be ramming home, is that Christianity has, whether by accident or design, not told us the full story, and this that an on-the-spot transfiguration, a metamorphosis, resurrection, if you like, is possible whilst, and I say again, still very much within the flesh of this world. Indeed, and as a direct consequence, even this old earth of ours might be belatedly revealed as the province of paradise it always was intended to be, but which we have been, under church tuition, advised to see as a paradise lost. Shame on us. But should you doubt such wondrous transformations, well, in my next article I'll show you a staggering photograph to prove that, on the spot, and in real time, miracles do indeed happen, and yeah, this in complete and awful defiance of every damn thing we in our arrogance ever thought was an irrefutable law of how this material world ticks. Trust me, this one photograph alone will blow the balls off everything. Just hang on until my next article to see it for yourselves. Join me next then upon the bank of the sparkling beck that defines his lips as I, childlike and clumsy, went through my own playful reenactment of that opening of the mouth ceremony in echo of that which may have been carried out upon him in that tomb at Golgotha, although, stupid me, being at that time supremely oblivious to that which my ignorant gesture of an archaic act would then trigger. The events which followed will, I guarantee, send shock waves through the very foundations of all you yourself have ever thought was possible, impossible in this life, a miracle no less, and one instigated by no high priest, but by a bloke whom merely dared to allow his own boy within to innocently play upon the bank of a Cumbrian beck one bright November afternoon. And yes, that which transpired there, along with the events that would blow my mind a week later, I admit, horrified me both man and boy, although these 14 years later the pair of us are now left forever enraptured by that which initially freaked us out, for I now feel it was an underlining of what must be our true and marvelous potential within this great loving mind, the mind which we prefer to tag as merely the universe, thus I guess bypassing, for it's too damn shocking to contemplate even the slightest suggestion that this immensity is both as alive and conscious as ourselves. Moreover, let me tell you that I believe that even the air we breathe, let alone the earth beneath our feet, is likewise alive, is knowing, is utterly aware and conscious of every swallow's wing beat, as it is our every thought, For see how it has read the hearts and minds of our ancestors towards the hopes and prayers they offered up to their gods of earth and sky, and as such has made them all gigantic and alive beneath our boots, and so loving must this force be, because surely such wonders can only come about via something that loves us and this world beyond our comprehension, that I warrant that all it wishes is to now work miracles with us, and yes, this even including that miracle of miracles which will be our ultimate victory over death, so says not I, but rather these stunning pictures in a landscape. For me, something stupendously joyful is blossoming upon the face this our ill-treated planet, and so colossal are its pictograms of love that they can now be seen even from space. And okay, judge me a crank, because surely all this is too beautiful to be true. But please allow me just 2 more articles before you dismiss me as such. Until my next article, wherein will be disclosed perhaps the most visually shocking of all these missing revelations, I would just like to sincerely thank you for coming thus far with me. Yours GKGX.